The station was crowded, trains roaring in and out like any other day until one police dog suddenly froze. Shadow refused to move from a single passenger sitting on that bench. No command could pull him away. Seconds later, his growl changed everything. Officers moved in, and what they found beneath that bench left the entire station in absolute silence. But the real question is, why did Shadow refuse to move in the first place? And what was hidden there that no one saw coming? Here's the full story. But before we roll it, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and make sure you've subscribed, because the next story might just top this one, and trust me, you'll want to be here when it does. The morning rush at Union Station was its usual blur of footsteps, coffee cups, and scattered voices echoing through the high-arched ceilings. Trains came and went, their whistles cutting through the noise, but amid that movement, one thing refused to shift: a German shepherd named Shadow. He stood frozen beside a wooden bench on Platform 4, his gaze locked on a man seated there. The man, in a gray coat and travel bag at his feet, avoided every curious glance. He kept his head low, his hand trembling slightly as he pretended to scroll through his phone. Shadow's handler, Officer Daniel Briggs, had seen his partner act strangely before, but never like this. The dog's fur bristled, his tail was rigid, and no matter how many times Daniel gave the command to move, Shadow stayed rooted, growling low as if sensing something that no one else could. Passengers began to slow down, forming a small circle around the strange standoff. The man looked up once, just enough to meet Daniel's eyes, and for that fleeting second there was something cold there. A flicker of fear or guilt, Daniel couldn't tell. Security was called to keep the crowd back, while Daniel crouched beside his dog, speaking softly to him, scanning the man's every movement. Then something caught Daniel's eye. Shadow wasn't looking at the man anymore. His nose dipped slightly toward the floor, then beneath the bench. His nostrils flared sharply. He began pawing at the ground. Daniel's instincts kicked in. "Hold the platform," he shouted to the nearest officer. "Evacuate that area now." The man's expression shifted instantly from nervous to panicked. He stood abruptly, clutching his bag, but before he could step away, Shadow lunged forward, blocking his path with a deep, thunderous bark that echoed off the station walls. Officers rushed in, surrounding the man who froze as his bag slipped from his hands. Every second stretched thin. The man whispered something under his breath, shaking his head slowly, as if weighing a decision no one else could understand. Daniel noticed his partner's attention hadn't moved back to the man. It stayed on that spot beneath the bench. The dog's nose pressed closer to the edge, tail stiff, body trembling with focus. Something was there. The man's sudden surrender didn't match the fear radiating off him. It was almost as if he wanted to be caught. And as the officers took him into custody, Daniel's eyes followed the space under that bench, a narrow gap barely wide enough for a hand to fit. Shadow lowered himself again, nose twitching, breathing hard. He gave a short, urgent bark, then looked up at Daniel, eyes locked, pleading for action. Something about that look told Daniel this wasn't over, not even close. Whatever was beneath that bench was what Shadow had sensed all along. And as the crowd stared, waiting, Daniel reached down, his hand hovering inches above the darkness below the wood. Then Shadow barked again once, sharp and fierce, cutting through the station like a warning shot. Something about that bark made Daniel freeze. Something under that bench was alive. For a moment, everything at the station seemed to stop. Even the overhead speaker announcing departures crackled into silence. Officer Daniel Briggs stared at the narrow darkness beneath the bench as Shadow kept barking, each sound sharp enough to slice through the thick air of tension. The man they had just detained sat against a pillar nearby, hands cuffed but eyes darting always toward that same bench. Every time Shadow barked, his shoulders flinched. His lips moved as if murmuring a silent prayer. Daniel knelt down beside the bench, careful not to touch anything. The floor was marked with tiny scuff lines, dust smeared into arcs like something had been dragged there recently. He slid his flashlight between the floor and the underside of the wood. A flash of metal glimmered back. Not a weapon, something rectangular, wired. Daniel's heartbeat spiked. He shouted for the bomb unit. The platform was cleared within seconds. Passengers herded out, their voices trembling as they hurried away. But even as the area emptied, Shadow refused to budge. His growl had lowered into a slow rumble, a sound Daniel had only heard when his partner sensed life. He whispered under his breath, "What are you seeing, boy?" The bomb squad arrived, and one of the techs slid a remote camera beneath the bench. The monitor flickered to life. Dust particles shimmered in the flashlight beam. Then the camera stopped. On screen was a small metal case with blinking green lights. But that wasn't what drew everyone's attention. The side of the case had something wedged against it, a small cloth bundle, moving. The techs froze. "Something's inside," one muttered. Daniel's chest tightened. That realization, something alive trapped against that box, sent a chill through the room. Shadow whined softly now, inching closer, his eyes full of urgency. He wasn't warning of danger anymore. He was pointing towards someone who needed saving. The bomb unit began working to secure the device. Sweat beaded on their foreheads. The wires looked crude, hand-wrapped, unstable. One wrong move could mean disaster. Daniel glanced back at the detained man. The fear in his eyes wasn't the fear of being caught, it was the fear of losing something. The man finally spoke, his voice cracking as he said, "Please, don't let it go off." But his gaze wasn't toward the bomb, it was toward that bundle. Daniel's heart sank. Could it be possible? Was someone inside that cloth? Minutes crawled by as the bomb techs worked with surgical precision. Shadow stood perfectly still beside them, ears perked, eyes fixed on the case like he understood the stakes. Finally, one soft click. The blinking green lights went dark. The lead tech looked up, exhaling, device disarmed. The crowd watching from behind the police line burst into relieved whispers. Daniel wasted no time. He reached beneath the bench, gently pulling out the small cloth bundle. It was heavier than it looked, wrapped tight in layers of gray fabric. Daniel unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small, half-conscious infant, cheeks pale, lips trembling from the cold. Gasps filled the platform. Even the officers around Daniel fell silent. The man in cuffs broke down crying, his voice raw. She had nothing to do with this. Please save her." Daniel's thoughts raced. What had this man planned? And why hide a baby beneath a bench, wired to something that could destroy everything? Shadow pressed closer, licking the baby's hand gently, his body trembling with emotion, his instincts telling him that this was what he had sensed from the very start. The medics rushed forward, taking the infant in their arms. But something still didn't make sense. If the man wasn't the bomber, then who was? Shadow turned his head sharply toward the station entrance, ears raised. A faint metallic click echoed through the air. Daniel followed his gaze. Someone else had just slipped through the side exit, dressed in the same uniform as maintenance staff. And in that instant, Daniel realized this wasn't over. The real threat was still moving, and only Shadow knew where to look next. The echo of that metallic click sent a shockwave through Daniel's nerves. Shadow was already moving before any command left his lips, launching off the platform, paws striking against tile as he sprinted toward the sound. "Shadow, track!" Daniel shouted, breaking into a run. Passengers who had just begun to calm scattered again as the K9 tore through the corridor, nose pressed low, growls vibrating through his chest. Officers followed close behind, radios crackling with urgent chatter. The scent trail was fresh. Whoever the man was, he had been there moments ago. The reflective vest, the gloves, the maintenance cap, it had all been a disguise. Shadow stopped near a row of vending machines, sniffing the ground, then barked twice and charged left toward the freight elevator that led to the underground storage area. Daniel's mind was piecing it together as he ran. The detained passenger, the device, the baby, none of it was random. The man on the platform wasn't setting a bomb. He was running from one. Someone else had planted it, and that someone was still inside the station. The elevator doors slammed shut just as they rounded the corner. Stairs, Daniel ordered, already vaulting toward the stairwell. Shadow bounded down beside him, muscles flexing, claws scraping against metal steps as the air below grew colder and darker. When they reached the bottom, Daniel saw the flicker of a flashlight ahead. A shadow moved fast through the maze of storage crates. Shadow growled, his teeth flashing as he advanced, guided by pure instinct. Daniel signaled to 2 backup officers to circle the side exits. Every second mattered. If there was another device, this man could be preparing it now. The flashlight beam swayed again. Then a loud clatter. A crate tipped over, and from behind it, a figure emerged, sprinting toward the back gate. Shadow lunged before Daniel could react. His bark was deafening in the narrow space. He leapt forward, tackling the suspect to the ground. The man screamed, twisting under the weight of the dog's grip. Daniel rushed in, weapon drawn, pinning the man's arm behind his back. A duffel bag lay a few feet away, unzipped, wires spilling out. "Device confirmed," someone shouted from behind. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Get EOD down here now." The suspect thrashed, yelling, "It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. He was supposed to deliver it." "Not." Daniel cut him off, dragging him up. "Who planned this?" The man's voice shook. "They wanted him caught so they could get the baby out. He was never meant to survive." The words hit like ice. The detained passenger upstairs, the one crying for the infant, had been framed. Shadow stood motionless beside the bag now, nose twitching. The faint electronic pulse of the timer echoed softly. Daniel's throat tightened. He could almost hear the heartbeat of the station itself, every second ticking closer to disaster. But then Shadow turned sharply away from the bag and toward a vent opening on the side wall. His bark came again, low and rhythmic. Daniel frowned, following the sound. He crouched beside the vent and saw it, another small blinking light. The bag was only a decoy. The real device was hidden in the wall. Adrenaline surged through him. He called it in immediately, guiding the bomb team to the location. Shadow's focus never wavered. Even as the techs took position, hands steady, eyes locked on the live timer counting down from 45 seconds. Daniel held his breath. Wires cut. Silence. Then click. Timer stopped at 3. The tension broke like a flood. Officers exhaled, relief washing over their faces. Daniel knelt beside Shadow, resting a trembling hand on his neck. "You did it, boy." But deep down, he knew there was still one piece missing. Why target this passenger? Why plant an infant under the bench? There was a reason this station had been chosen. And somehow it was all connected to the man who was still crying upstairs. The underground corridor was quiet now, filled only with the fading echo of footsteps and the soft whimper of a tired K9. Officers had taken the suspect away, the explosives safely disarmed, and trains were finally resuming above. Yet for Daniel Briggs, none of it felt complete. The missing piece still gnawed at him, the reason Shadow had refused to leave that man on the platform in the first place. Back upstairs, medics were treating the infant, now stable and breathing normally. The baby's faint cry filled the air as Daniel approached, Shadow trotting beside him, tail lowered but eyes still alert. The detained man sat nearby, face pale, wrists cuffed loosely now, his gaze fixed on the child. Daniel crouched in front of him. "You need to tell me everything," he said quietly. The man's eyes brimmed with tears. "My name's Aaron Keller," he began, voice trembling. "That's my daughter Emma. I worked for the company that manages this station's cargo routes. Months ago, I uncovered a network moving illegal weapons through shipments. When I tried to report it, they threatened my family." He swallowed hard. "I went into hiding, but they found me. They told me if I didn't carry a package onto this platform, they'd take Emma. I refused. Then they planted her there instead. They wanted the explosion blamed on me so the real traffickers could vanish." Daniel felt the weight of it settle over him. The panic, the bag, the trembling hands. It all connected now. The man's fear had never been guilt, it had been terror for his child's life. Shadow pressed closer to Aaron, sniffing his sleeve gently, tail flicking once in quiet understanding. Daniel spoke softly. You didn't move because you knew she was there. And Shadow didn't move because he felt her before anyone else did. Aaron nodded weakly. He saved her. Before Daniel could respond, an officer rushed over with an update. Sir, we traced the suspect we caught downstairs. He's part of the same ring Keller reported months ago. The entire network's in motion. We've already got warrants being prepared. For the first time that day, Daniel allowed himself a long breath. The station was safe. The device was gone. The people responsible were finally exposed, but one thing stayed clear in his mind. The very first moment, Shadow had refused to move. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't defiance. It was instinct. Pure, unwavering instinct to protect a life that couldn't call for help. As medics handed the baby back to her father, the platform that had once been filled with chaos now felt eerily calm. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, glinting off Shadow's fur as he sat quietly, head tilted, eyes following the reunion. Aaron knelt, clutching Emma close. Thank you, he whispered, though his voice trembled too much to say more. Daniel placed a hand on Shadow's collar, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. Around them, officers began clearing the area, passengers slowly returning to their trains, unaware of how close they had all come to tragedy. But for those who had been there, one truth remained unshakable. If not for the dog who refused to move, the entire station would have fallen silent forever. As Daniel led his partner back toward the exit, he glanced once more at that wooden bench, the same one that had hidden a secret, a child, and a second chance at life. Shadow looked up at him, ears perked, waiting for the next command. Daniel smiled faintly. Come on, hero, he said under his breath. Time to go home. Shadow trotted beside him, the rhythmic echo of their steps fading beneath the returning hum of trains and voices, a sound that felt at last peaceful again. As the crowd gathered once more, Shadow stood tall beside Daniel, the station now quiet and safe. Later that evening, beneath the fading glow of the setting sun, Shadow was awarded the Medal of Valor, a symbol of the courage that saved an innocent life and restored hope where fear once ruled.